Hello and welcome. I'm John Feinblatt, president of Everytown for Gun Safety.
And I'm Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action.
Today, we couldn't be luckier to have Senator Kamala Harris for the fourth installment of our virtual series, Demanding Women, Quarantine Conversations about Gun Violence. Senator, thanks so much for joining us today. It's actually a thrill to have you here with us.
I'm glad to be with you both, John and Shannon. Thank you for the work you do for so many and on behalf of so many. Thank you for your courage and your voice.
Well, thank you for those words. And let's just get right into it. We've been talking with some of the most powerful women leaders about an issue I know you care about deeply, and it's how to address one of our oldest public health emergencies, gun violence, in the middle of a new one, the coronavirus. And so today we're going to focus on one really troubling truth, and that is that communities of color are suffering the most when it comes to both gun violence and COVID-19. And look, I think the sad thing is that we know why, and it's because America has a long history of racism, and that racism has created deep divides in healthcare and housing and education and so much more. And what's so sad about it is that those divides often can be deadly. And Senator, I know you are totally committed to these issues, and you've been a wonderful partner to both Moms Demand Action and to Everytown, and we so appreciate that. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, and that's the exciting part. And so Shannon, she's going to take it away from here, and I'm going to watch the rest on Twitter.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. And Senator, I'm a new constituent of yours, and I am so thrilled to talk to you today. As you've traveled across the country, I know you have seen a lot of Moms Demand Action volunteers who are also proud members of the K-Hive. And I know they are so excited to watch you today.
Thank you. I have to tell you, and to your point, Shannon, I spent a lot of time all over our country, and one of the most powerful things to see everywhere I went were those moms and dads with those moms and students with those moms wearing those red T-shirts and demanding that they be heard and they be seen and that their stories are told. And again, just incredible courage and all these people volunteering to do it and standing in long lines in the cold and in the heat. Real extraordinary leadership. So thank you. And thanks to all the moms who demand action.
Thank you. There's something that's on a lot of our volunteers' minds right now, and I know on yours too. We have all been shaken as a country about the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, and he was shot to death while out on a jog. You're a former prosecutor. Can you tell us, given the national and state laws that encourage armed vigilantism and murder, particularly of Black and brown people, how do you view that through that lens of being a former prosecutor?
Well, I'll tell you, and I have personally prosecuted a number of cases and kinds of cases. These stand your ground laws and these states that have these citizen arrest laws have often and frequently been used as an excuse, if not a cover, for people who are motivated by racism and racial profiling. And so we have seen that, and we have seen that it has been used as an excuse to kill Black and brown people, in particular Black and brown young men. And we just have to speak truth about that, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us. And so I really appreciate you raising the point. During these mass shootings, we know that young Black and brown men are being, killed there, and they're being killed in these individual cases. And one of the things I appreciate about Everytown and Moms Demand Action and so many of the advocates is that we understand that each one of these lives is precious and equal in value to their families, to their community, and to us as a society. And so, what we need to do is also recognize that when you have these kinds of laws, like these stand your ground laws, is that it helps to breed the legitimate distrust that so many communities have in the criminal justice system and in law enforcement. And, so in particular in the way that they're applied and the excuse that some are given with as though it's a shield for their misbehavior and frankly, their racism. And, when we look at that, and then you also look at what's happening from the White House and the U.S. Department of Justice with people like Michael Flynn, when you look at what's happened in terms of letting people off, we know that there are two systems of justice in America, and that's not deniable. And what it does is, again, it breeds mistrust. You look at Ahmaud Arbery, you look at Breonna Taylor, and we know that they have not been given justice. I'm actually calling on the Department of Justice, the United States Department of Justice, to investigate what is happening there. But when you have people like Michael Flynn, who has pled guilty and is being let off, it reinforces the idea that when you have power and you have access, there's one form of justice. And when you don't, then you actually get no justice. So there's a lot of work to do, and we're all in it together.
And I know you are doing a lot of that work. Speaking of which, I'd like to pivot for a second to COVID relief packages. The House just passed another package that is substantially larger than the earlier ones, and it includes several pieces that address suicide and domestic violence and expands victim assistance funds, voter access provisions. Do you see the Senate taking something like that up? And do you have a message for Majority Leader Mitch McConnell?
Yeah, I do. One of the statements that Leader McConnell made last week was to suggest that there's no urgency to this moment. And I beg to differ. I couldn't be in more disagreement. When you have now at least 1 in 5 mothers, if not 2 in 5 mothers, describing their children under the age of 12 as being hungry in America today, when you look at the fact that 36 million people in just the last couple of months have become unemployed, 36 million people who were not prepared for this, most of whom did not have substantial savings and are now unemployed. When you look at the lines that people are forming for hours to get food from a food bank, and the level of food insecurity that's happening in America, when you look at the fact that our children, so many of them who do not have access to the internet and do not have technology, even if they do have access to the internet, they don't have a computer, they don't have a laptop, and are therefore missing substantial amounts of what should be their education. And it's going to create further disparities in our society. When you look at also the racial disparities in terms of who is being impacted and the pre-existing conditions that contributed to their vulnerability around this. When you look at the fact that 90% of women and minority-owned businesses did not get relief from the Paycheck Protection Program, because so many of our smaller businesses, our women and minority-owned businesses, don't have the relationships with the big banker, and may not even have a line of credit, and so they were not a priority in terms of who got the outreach and who got the benefit. So there are so many issues that are a matter of urgency, and not to mention also state and local government, which is hurting. In our state, in California, there are fire departments and cities that are talking about furloughing essential workers for 10% of the work year, because they just can't afford to pay anymore, because the responsibility for addressing this pandemic has fallen on the local and state leadership, where there has been a vacuum of leadership in the federal government and the White House. So I would say to all of these issues that Mitch McConnell has to have a sense of urgency. I have expressed this to him. I have expressed it in every way. But it also is going to rely on the American people and all of us together to say this is an urgent matter, and we need leaders to lead. And the way this is impacting us, could care less who we voted for in the last election, could care less about the party with which we're registered to vote. Everyone in America right now who was already in a vulnerable position living paycheck to paycheck are suffering right now, and they deserve to have the relief to which their government should give in a moment of extraordinary crisis. I'm also arguing that we should have recurrent payments instead of just one $1,200 check. for people, we need to have, and I have actually a bill that says that for families and individuals that are making less than $100,000 a year, they should receive a check of up to $2,000 a month during the course of the pandemic to help them stay on their feet as best as possible, as opposed to falling into poverty during a crisis that was not of their making.
Well, as you mentioned, there are so many crises that are bubbling up that are related to COVID. One of those things that we're seeing is that since the outbreak, many websites are selling out of ghost guns. And these unserialized homemade guns have shown up at crime scenes across the country, as well as here in California at the Saugus High School shooting, for example, in November. What do you think we should and can be doing about this rise of ghost guns in America?
So, Shannon, I have an initiative. I've called it the Untraceable Firearms Act with Senator Blumenthal. And what we are saying is that there should be that we should require serial numbers on ghost guns, that we should require background checks in order for anyone to be able to purchase a ghost gun. And for everyone's information, you probably know this, but ghost guns are basically a do-it-yourself firearm. You get a kit and you can make it at home. People can make it at home, which means that, of course, they bypass all of the precautions that we have put in place to make sure that people who are dangerous to themselves or others don't have access, to make sure that people who can clear background checks have access. That's why I'm proposing this bill along with Senator Blumenthal, and basically to require also that people who sell ghost guns also have to have a license. And this is on top of, as you know, what I've been advocating for years around reasonable background checks, what we need to do in terms of also having reasonable gun safety laws in place that recognize that too many of our children are in absolute and utter fear that some gunman is going to break into their classroom when they're back in school and when they've been in school. And we need to make sure that we have a reasonable approach to this, understanding that so many lives are at stake if we don't. And frankly, people need to have the courage. People need to have the courage in Congress to implement smart gun safety laws.
And you're exactly right. And that's a lot of work that's being done by you and others at a federal level. When we look at states, right? So in your home state of California, and it's really on the front lines of tackling this pandemic. Many governors are working to stop the pandemic, and yet we're seeing these AstroTurf protests that are springing up in state houses. They're fueled by fear-mongering from the NRA and their allies, and it's really terrifying. These rallies are organized and funded by gun extremists and other fringe groups, and they're open carrying to intimidate others and to undermine democracy. What is your message for governors who are facing these protests?
Right. Well, first of all, let me just, for those who don't know, because it was a new term to me, and I was like, okay, what does AstroTurf protest mean? And it's basically, it's not grassroots. It's a facade. It's a front for some other agenda. It's not real. It's not natural. And so AstroTurf protests, you couldn't be more right. And to your point, they're engaged in open carry. I'm very deeply disturbed when I see them protesting with openly displaying and being armed with semi-automatic weapons. So listen, I'm going to always be supportive of peaceful protests. I wouldn't be here were it not for that having happened in the history of our country. But the reality is that it is a political agenda, to your point, that is not connected with what they profess it to be, which is about fighting for working Americans. And their agenda is to go after, in particular, governors who have taken a very courageous, difficult stand, but courageous in the face of what their responsibility is for the public health and well-being of their communities. To your point of us both now being Californians, I'm very proud of Governor Gavin Newsom, and what he has done. He has taken a very principled position, understanding that he has the responsibility with concerning himself first with the health and well-being of the people of our state, and putting that before his political, his political strength or expediency. And this is a moment where we're literally all in this together. And this pandemic has made that clear. And we should be standing together and rejecting forces and voices that are trying to separate us.
Yep. And I would just add to that, we're so grateful that Governor Newsom has allocated money for gun violence intervention programs as part of his budget. Really grateful he's making that happen and his commitment to gun safety.
And Shannon, I'll tell you that he and I were elected on the same day and took our oath on the same day, January 8th, 2004, when I was elected district attorney of San Francisco and he was elected mayor of San Francisco. And he and I have actually been working on smart gun safety laws since those days up until now. So to your point, long history there of good work.
For both of you. So thank you for that. I want to turn to something that I know is important to you to discuss. For decades, Black and Brown communities have been disproportionately impacted by gun violence and voter suppression efforts. And now these same communities are being hit hardest by coronavirus. So as we look ahead to 2020 and the elections, how do we ensure fair elections so that all voices can be heard?
Yeah, Shannon, I mean, one of the great pieces of work that you have done in your advocacy, and so many have who are part of this, is to impress upon people and remind them about why their vote matters. And doing that by reminding people of what's at stake and therefore why they should vote, how it will impact their lives. And these are the reasons they should vote. Well, we're going to still have that challenge in November. But now we have an additional challenge because of the pandemic, which is folks can look back at us and say, well, that's fine. You've given me reasons why I should vote. But I also have reasons why I shouldn't vote, which is I don't want to get sick. This is going to be one of our challenges in November. Yeah. So to meet this challenge, I'm proposing what we've named the Vote Safe Act. And essentially, it would be $5 billion to the states to encourage those who don't have vote by mail, like we do in California, to put in place vote by mail. But also understanding that some folks it's going to be more difficult to vote by mail, such as our indigenous brothers and sisters who may not have a postal address. And so we make accommodations for that to make it easier for them to vote by mail. It is about requiring, too, that states put in place early voting, so at least 20 days before the election, so people can make their plan around their life and not have to wait until one day to vote. And then the third piece is safe voting. So encouraging states to do things like put in place curbside voting, to put in place wait time standards. So unlike Wisconsin, where people stood in line for 2 and 3 hours and then 50-something people got COVID-19, some of whom were poll workers, what we would say is that states have to say that a voter should only have to stand in line for X number of minutes, and then set up the polling structure in their community so that no one would wait in line more than those many minutes. So these are some of the things that we need to do. But, the reality is that in some states, we probably will not get vote by mail in time for November. But what we can do is use our advocacy to demand safe voting so that no one has to make a choice between their health and their right to exercise their vote, especially in this election when there is so much at stake.
And we will be there supporting you every step of the way on that work. We have a video question from one of our partners in California. We were talking about the importance of gun safety in our state. And we want you to listen and answer if you would. Let's play that now.
Sure. Okay.
My name is Julius Thibodeau. I'm the strategy program manager for the Advanced Peace Organization here in Sacramento, California. I run a gun violence reduction program mainly aimed at cyclical and retaliatory gun violence happening in Black and Brown urban communities. My question to you today is, for programs such as Advanced Peace and other CBOs that are aimed at gun violence reduction and are clearly fighting for sustainability and to maintain funding for these programs, how do we have our voices heard in Washington, D.C. by our leaders and our legislators?
Yeah. Well, there's the advice I would have given you before the pandemic, which would include continuing to make those trips as so many of the organizations have made for years to Washington, to knock on the doors of your legislators. But in addition to that, when we reopen, whenever that is, in addition to that, I would encourage you to reach out to my office. And for you who live in states other than California, reach out to your congressional offices to demand that they hold hearings on these issues so that you can go before Congress and testify about what you are seeing, what you are hearing, and what you are feeling as a reflection of what whole communities are experiencing. The trouble with, and frankly, I think that the real misconduct, if you will, in the United States Congress on this subject has been to politicize it, to make this a subject of some ideological perspective instead of understanding that our children are dying, instead of understanding that those bullets could care less who someone voted for in the last election, instead of understanding it is reasonable to say that we would do a background check on someone before they can buy a lethal weapon. So we have to continue to show people what is happening, to make them, and frankly, to confront them with the facts that are just without dispute, and should compel behavior. But I say all that in terms of the United States Congress because you can also certainly do that with your local legislature, be it at a city, county, or a state level. But ultimately, we need national laws. We need smart gun safety laws. We need a national background check standard. I have fought for this for years because each individual state can do its part, but until we have a national standard, we are not going to truly be safe. And so I would urge you again, in California, reach out to my office. In other states, reach out to congressional offices, your Congress, your House of Representative members, or your senators. Each state has two, and continue your advocacy and remind them of the stories and the people behind these stories.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Julius, for that question. I think that's great advice. I'd like to talk about 2020 for a second. It may not seem like it, but we are in the midst of election season. So how do you think Vice President Biden and even candidates down the ticket should be talking about gun safety as they campaign for the next 6 months?
Well, I've actually been on a debate stage with Joe Biden, and I actually know how he is talking about it. He is talking about gun violence as a father who is actually, sadly, just tragically, who has lost a son, not to gun violence, but has lost a son, and knows the pain of what that means. And so when you hear him talk about this issue in terms of the need for smart gun safety laws, it is something that he feels deeply, one, out of a sense of connection to those parents who have lost their children, but also understanding the devastation that it creates to a community and to us as a society. Back actually after Everytown and a number of things, I actually, when I was Attorney General of California and he was Vice President, worked with him on what we were doing then after a lot of the tragic cases had been happening during the course of his vice presidency and with President Obama, to figure out how we could replicate nationally some of the work that we've been doing in California. He has a long-standing record of working on this, and he has a very tight, very strong policy when he is elected president. And again, part of the way that the structure of government works is this. We're going to do the advocacy with our members of Congress. We're going to press them to write the smart bills, many of which have been written already. One of the reasons they're not being pushed through is because people think, at least in the last few years, that it's not going to go anywhere because the president won't sign it. Who is president will matter on these issues, because I know that Joe Biden will sign laws that are about smart gun safety. And so this is one of the biggest issues that is going to be before us as a nation. And we need a president in the White House who sees these families, who sees community, and who understands that it's a false choice to say you're either in favor of the Second Amendment or you want to take everyone's guns away. We just want somebody who understands we need smart gun safety laws. And Joe Biden gets it. He really does get it.
Yep. Yep, and he has said he would prioritize this, which is something that we look forward to when we elect a gun sense president in 2020. So we have another question for you from social media. This one is from Facebook user Alicia G. And her question for you is, please tell us about your personal experience of dealing with gun violence or victims of gun violence. How has that shaped your political stance on the prevention of gun violence?
Yeah. Well, I have personally prosecuted homicide cases. I have hugged more mothers of homicide victims than I care to tell you. I have seen autopsy photographs. I have seen the devastation that gun violence literally exacts on the human body. I've had a lot of experiences in firsthand experiencing the pain, the tragedy, the injustice of it all. And it's part of what motivates me to be an advocate, along with all the friends who are on this call, to demand that we have smart gun safety laws and an assault on a ban on the assault weapons, what we need to do around background checks, what we need to do around making sure that these ghost guns are regulated. There are a number of things that we need to do, and I will be here always standing and fighting for what is right, because the goal for all of us is that not another mother has to shed a tear, not another father has to shed a tear, or a sibling or a child, because the person they loved, that they relied on, that they respected, was tore down by gun violence.
Well, and survivors, as you know, is why we do this work, why I personally am motivated every day to wake up and work on this as a full-time volunteer. So thank you for bringing that up. I'd like to close with one more thing, sort of an inspirational and aspirational question for you. And that is, what message do you have for my fellow Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action volunteers who, as you mentioned earlier, fight tirelessly every day for gun safety?
So I've seen you guys out there. You are so powerful. And I'd ask you that in the midst of this pandemic, this crisis of a proportion that we've never really witnessed, do not let this dampen your spirit in any way. There is so much at stake coming up, in particular in this election. And as we know, so much of your advocacy is about not only changing hearts and minds, but changing the laws. And legislators and a president are going to have the most profound impact on what laws are written and passed and enacted and enforced. And so continue with your advocacy and know that you are speaking for so many people. You are having an impact on the lives of people who you may never meet and may never know your name, but their lives are forever improved and uplifted because of your advocacy, your selfless work, and your commitment to this issue. So I thank you, I thank you, I thank you. We're going to keep fighting, and when we fight, we win.
We do. I love that message. Thank you so much for joining us today. It has truly been my privilege to hear from one of the most powerful voices in Washington, a true champion for gun safety in the Senate. We are so thankful and grateful to have you in our corner, Senator.
Thank you, Shannon. You take care of yourself and everybody, and be well, be well, be well.
You too.
Okay.
So thank you to everyone who joined us today on Twitter and Facebook. We will be back with New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham on Thursday, May 21st at noon Eastern. And if you'd like to get involved with Everytown, Moms Demand Action, and Students Demand Action, text the word READY to 64433. And as always, stay safe and remember, nothing is more productive, persuasive, or powerful than demanding women. Thank you so much.